All right, so remember last week when we talked about multiplying and dividing rational numbers that we discussed that if the signs are the same when we're multiplying and dividing, it is going to be a positive number, and if the signs are different, it's going to be negative. So let's take a look at the problems we have. We're going to do 3 just pretty straightforward ones, and then we'll do a couple of ones that might be similar to something you would see on a test or maybe even the EOGs. So the first one we have here is 5 halves times 2 and 1/10. Now, when we are multiplying fractions, if we have a mixed number, we have to turn it into an improper fraction first in order to multiply. So to do that, I'm going to take my denominator times my whole number, so 10 times 2 would give me 20, and then you add that number to the numerator. So 10 times 2 is 20, plus 1 is 21. And I'm going to rewrite that as 5 halves times my new numerator is 21, and my denominator stays 10. And from here, it's pretty straightforward. You multiply numerator times numerator and denominator times denominator. So 5 times 21, 5 times 1 is 5, 5 times 2 is 10, 2 times 10 is 20. So my answer is 105/20. And we can leave it like this, or we can simplify it down. So I know that 5 is going to divide evenly into both of these. So 5 times, or 105 divided by 5 would give me 21. And 20 divided by 5 is 4. So 105/20 or 21/4, or we could even change it back into a mixed number, depending on what the question asks us. Okay, any questions about this first problem?
No.
Okay. All right, let's look at the next one. -2 1/4 times 1/4. So right off the bat, we see we have a negative number and a positive number. So is our answer going to be positive or negative on this one?
Negative.
Because we have a negative times a positive. All right, so let's change this to an improper fraction. So 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. So 9/4 time, or negative 9/4, ooh, can't forget that, times 1/4. All right. So -9 times 1 gives me -9. And 4 times 4 gives me 16. So my answer is -9/16. Any questions about that one? All right, we're going to do this last fraction down here. So -3/4 times -3/4. Is my answer going to be positive or negative? Okay. All right, so if you do -3 times -3, what answer are we going to get for our numerator?
Positive.
Positive what? Positive 9. And 4 times 4 gives me
16.
So negative 3/4 times negative 3/4 is 9/16. Any questions about that one? All right. Oh, good morning, Jada. All right, let's look at a decimal now. Okay, are we okay with fractions? We understand we multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. Yes. All right. All right, so let's look at decimals. So I have 2.5 times 3.2. And I'm going to rewrite this so they're stacked on top of each other, just like we would do a regular multiplication problem. Okay, so we know we're multiplying. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore this decimal point for now. Okay, we're going to worry about that when we get to the answer. So I'm going to start out by multiplying 2 times 25. If I take 25 times 2, what answer am I going to get? All right, so 50. All right, so we've taken care of the number in the ones place. The 3 here is in our tens place. So really, instead of multiplying 3 times 25, I'm really multiplying 30 times 25, okay, since this is in the tens. Because I'm multiplying by the tens place, I'm going to put a 0 in my ones as a placeholder, okay? So now I'm going to do 30 times 25, okay? So that gives me 15, carry my 1, 6 plus 1 is a 7. So 30 times 25 gives me 750. And we're going to add these two numbers together. So 0 plus 0 gives me 0. 5 plus 5 is 10. Put a 0 down, carry our 1. And 7 plus 1 is 8. Now, we are not finished because we have decimals in our problem. When we multiply a decimal times a decimal, or a whole number times a decimal, before we say that we are done with our answer, we need to count how many numbers are behind the decimal in the problem. So in 2.5, how many numbers are behind the decimal? Okay. So I have 1 here. In 3.2, how many numbers are behind the decimal? So if I have 1 in the first number and 1 in the second number, how many numbers behind the decimal are there altogether? Right. So that's going to equal 2. 1 plus 1 equals 2. So in my answer, I need to have 2 numbers behind the decimal. So here is 1 number behind the decimal, 2 numbers behind the decimal, and my decimal goes right here. So 1, 2 behind the decimal. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. So 2.5 times 3.2 is 8. Okay. So we have 8 to the left of the decimal and 2 zeros to the right. So my answer is 8. All right. Yes, Malachi. Any questions about multiplying decimals?
No.
All right. All right, let's take a look at a couple different problems now. That's really tiny. All right, so the first one says, on the number line below, A is less than B. Which expressions are negative? Okay, so when we want to know what expressions are negative, we're looking for just based on what we see in the number line, what would give us a negative answer. So looking at these two numbers, would you say A is negative or positive right now?
Positive.
A?
Negative, I meant.
Okay. And B would be?
Positive.
Positive. All right, so let's look at choice A. If I take A times B, so we have a negative times a positive, is my answer going to be a negative or a positive answer for A times B?
Negative.
Because we have two opposite signs, correct? So if our criteria is to select all that are negative, we know A is going to be a negative answer. What about the opposite of A times B? So if I have negative A times B, we said that's going to be a negative answer. If I have the opposite of negative A times B, is my answer going to be positive or negative?
Positive.
You're right. It is positive because we're taking the opposite of a negative, which would be a positive. So we know that answer is not going to be a negative answer. All right. What about the opposite of A times the opposite of B? Would that be positive or negative? The opposite of A times the opposite of B.
It's going to be positive.
I'm seeing two different answers here. All right, so let's start with B here. The opposite of positive B would be?
Negative. I mean, positive.
The opposite of positive is?
Negative.
All right, so we would have negative B. The opposite of negative A would be?
Positive.
Positive. So now we have positive A times negative B. Is that going to be a positive or a negative?
Negative.
Right. So remember, this just means the opposite of, okay? So if it's the opposite of positive, we know it's going to be negative. If it's the opposite of negative, we know it's going to be positive, okay? What about 2 times A? So positive 2 times negative a. Is that going to be a positive or a negative? Right,
Positive?
is going to be negative because we're taking a positive times a negative. All right, 2b minus a, and we know a is negative. So 2b minus a, is that going to be a positive or a negative answer? Malachi is on top of it today because we are opposite of a, so we are adding a. So 2b plus a. All right, and the last one we have is 2a minus b. So 2 times negative a minus b, if we change this to addition, would be plus negative b. Is that going to be a positive or a negative? So 2 times negative a would be a negative, plus more negative would be right, negative. Any questions about these?
No.
All right. All right. Let's look at one more type of problem here. I know it's a little hard to read. A red-throated loon is a type of diving bird that dives for its food. One particular loon dives for 8 seconds to a depth of 12 feet under the surface of the water. So if it is under the surface, is 12 going to be represented by a positive number?
Negative.
Right, because we are going below the surface. Assume the loon dives at a constant rate. Write an equation that can be used to express the elevation y of the loon after z seconds. Okay, into the dive. So we need to figure out how far the loon dives in 1 second. So if I make a chart, so we have our seconds, we have our depth. We know that in 8 seconds, it is negative 12 feet. So how would I figure out how far in 1 second? So from 8 to 1, am I multiplying or dividing, and what by? All right, we're going to divide by what?
I can't tell what that number is.
We have 8 seconds, and we're trying to get to 1 second. So what are we dividing by?
Dividing by 1.
8 divided by 1 is 1.
Yes?
So you're telling me that if I have, let's say, 8 stars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I want groups of 1. There's going to be 8 of them in each group. Because what you're telling me is that you're telling me that I'm going to make 1 group, which means I'm still going to have 8. I want 1 per group. So how many groups would I have if it's 1 per group? It's like this would be a group. This would be a group. There you go. 8. Okay. So remember, any number divided by itself is 1. Okay. So I need to divide this by 8. What is going on? There we go. My mouse does not want to write today. So what is negative 12 divided by 8? What is negative 12 divided by 8?
Negative 1.5.
Negative 1.5. So in 1 second, the loon dives 1.5 feet below the surface of the water. So we're going to use that to write an equation. Okay. So the elevation, okay. So we're going to do Z. Hold on. After Z seconds into the dive. I'm trying to read this and make sure I write it the right way. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do Y, which is how far, equals negative 1.5 Z. Okay, so how far if it goes 1.5 feet below in Z seconds? Okay, so that's what this means. This is depth, how far in Z. All right, so here is our answer for A. If the loon is at a depth of 22.5 feet under the surface of the water, how long was it diving for? All right, so 22.5 feet. 22.5 feet under the surface, would that be a positive or a negative number? If it's under the surface.
Negative.
Negative. Oh, I just realized we're doing some dividing, but that's okay. So negative 22.5 equals negative 1.5 Z. Okay. So if I want to go from negative 1.5 to negative 22.5, what am I going to multiply by?
Negative 22.5.
Well, we have negative 1.5 though. So what times negative 1.5 will give us 22.5. How would you figure that out? What's the opposite of multiplication? Right. So what is negative 22.5 divided by negative 1.5?
$15.
15. So 15 is our z. Okay. That was a pretty good guess. Any questions about this one? We went back to unit rate on this one.
No questions.
Okay. All right, let's take a look at your assignment for today. You only have one short one. And by short, I mean there's 5 questions on it, plus your warm-up and your exit ticket today. So for today, for multiplying rational numbers, you have 2 word problems. The first one is about your dog being put on a diet, and when you change the food in the feeding schedule, you keep a log of his weight, and you notice that he's losing 0.8 pounds per month. So if he's losing, that is a negative number. And question A wants you to write an expression that represents how much weight he loses after 6 months. So the pounds lost times the number of months. What number represents the change in your dog's weight? Okay, so from answer A, what would that be? So solve your expression in answer A. And then you need to list 3 factors that have a product of negative 3/5. I know it's a little hard to read, but it's negative 3/5. And a factor is a number that, when multiplied with a number or another factor, gives product. So 2 numbers that you would multiply together, okay? And then the last one is another word problem talking about temperature decrease, and want you to write an expression and explain what each factor in the expression means. Okay. Any questions about those 5 problems that you're going to do? No. All right, so as always, if you have questions as you're working, this will be open until 10:15. You can jump back in as needed. If you don't want to stay while you're working, that is perfectly fine with